Hello, this is Bob Dickinson. I'm a maintainer of MCP Inspector, and I'm here to talk about the Enterprise-Managed Authorization support we're going to do in Inspector v2 and give a quick demo of that. So first of all, Enterprise-Managed Authorization, also known as Zero-Touch OAuth for MCP, is a new extension to MCP made official on June 18th with broad support from a lot of client and MCP server vendors, and it essentially allows you to log into your enterprise IdP, identity provider, something like Okta, one time, and use that identity to authorize yourself to use all of your MCP servers that support the protocol. So instead of what you might be doing now, where you have a bunch of MCP servers and you have to do an auth to each one of those servers through your client, you'll be able to authenticate one time to your IdP and then leverage that to automatically be authenticated to a bunch of MCP servers. So very cool technology. Gets rid of a lot of user friction. It gives the enterprises a lot more control over access to MCP servers and what those MCP servers can do. Supported by Okta, obviously, who is one of the initiators of this, although everything's done through open standards. Anybody can implement any part of this protocol. Anthropic and Microsoft through Visual Studio Code are two of the early adopters on the client side. And a bunch of server vendors MCP server vendors have added support for it, with probably a lot more to come. So interesting ecosystem adoption. There was a lot of excitement generated about this, and I thought, well, we should probably figure out how to get this into MCP Inspector so people can play with it and also test their MCP servers that are participating in EMA. So I wrote an issue that you can check out if you want. And then a PR that implements it. And I'm just showing you this PR because Inspector v2, so the inspector that you probably all use right now is the v1 version, which is sort of on life support. We haven't been making a lot of changes to that. We're not going to implement EMA support in v1. We're actively working on v2, which hopefully won't be too much longer. And that's where this support is. So that isn't published yet, but if you do want to go in and get this PR branch, you can build it locally and you can play with this. And like I said, hopefully it'll be available for everybody soon. And speaking of that, I'll just give you a very quick look at Inspector v2 just so it doesn't blow your mind when I come back in a minute and do the demo of the EMA support. So this is what it looks like. I can connect to the everything server. I can go look at a bunch of tools. I can, print my environment. So just sort of like what it did before, but a little nicer looking. So let's also talk a little bit about this xaa.dev sandbox. So this is an awesome tool that was put out by Okta that allows us to basically build every part of the system that we need to make one of these EMA systems work. So it allows us to, essentially xaa.dev is going to serve as our IdP and as our authorization server for our MCP servers. And it does even a little bit more than that. But the general idea is you're going to register your app. So this is your client. So Cloud Code, VS Code, or in our case, MCP Inspector. So it'll be the IdP that your app connects to. And then you're going to register your MCP servers, which are your resource servers. And this will become the authorization server for those MCP servers. So I'll give you an idea what that looks like in a second. Actually, maybe I'll do that now. So this is very slick. You don't have to set up an account or anything. You can literally just come in, use an email address, as a mechanism to group these things together. So in this case, I have a couple of apps that I've already registered. I have VS Code, which I did a demo of a couple of days ago, and I have Inspector Client. So you can see that I kind of have everything I need already. I know what my IdP is. I have my client ID and my client secret, which is what I'm going to need to configure it. I have a couple of resources connected. I have this built-in sandbox MCP server. So they give you an MCP server that's just sort of ready to go and super easy to wire up to the IdP. And then you can also build your own MCP servers and use xaa.dev as an authorization server for your own MCP servers, which we've also done here. It's pretty slick. There's this integration guide. You don't really need all of this, but it is kind of cool. You can, if you click down here and you pick whichever one of these resources you want to look at, it shows you the entire flow, every piece of data that's going to go through the flow. So as you're debugging it, you can sort of see what's going on. And then it also is going to show you the resource client credentials. This is something to be aware of because these are not the client credentials that are set up when you define the resource itself. These are client credentials that are bound to the IdP's reference to that resource server, or to that, if that makes any sense. So this is basically where you want to get the client credentials that you're going to use in your MCP server configurations. And when you edit it for the first time, I'm not going to do this, but I'll just show you. It's super easy. It's a little app name, the URI, which in our case is just localhost 6274. And then for the resource connections, when you start, you can just pick this to-do MCP server, and it will fully register that resource and register it with the IDP. So you don't do anything, literally nothing else. You just click that, type in the basic information, click register app, and you're done. You have a whole working system. It's super slick. So let's show you how that works in MCP Inspector. In MCP Inspector, we have this little gear icon with client settings. And to begin with, all we have is Enterprise-Managed Authorization settings, so you can enable it. I've already configured this so it maintained my settings, but it's essentially the issuer URL that we got from xaa.dev where we just were, and the client ID and client secret that we also got from there. And that's it. That's all you need to do to configure the IDP side of this thing. If we're going to come back here later, and it'll show you once I've signed into the IDP, it'll show me that I'm signed in, whether my session's valid, and give me the ability to log out if I want to do that. But this is the client side configuration, pretty straightforward. And then let's go look at one of these servers. We'll look at both of them. So this is the to-do server that is built in. So they give you this URI just to configure, and which is, so you're just going to set up a new server, HTTP server with this URI at xaa.dev. And if we go into the settings, under OAuth settings, same thing. We're going to click on Enterprise-Managed Authorization. We're going to take that client ID and secret, though I showed you where to get that on xaa.dev. And you also want to pass in the scopes. Now, for this particular server, test server, you need to pass in this todos.read and mcp.access scopes. If you don't pass those in, you're not going to get any resources, which is a good way to verify that the scopes actually work. But anyway, this is also in that xaa.dev integration guide page. So you're just going to take those values, stick them in here, and now we've configured this server. The other one we're going to look at is this test server EMA. So this is we have a composable test server in Inspector that essentially allows you to, either with code or through a JSON file, spin up a test server that has whatever combination of tools, resources, whatever capabilities you want, and whatever authentication you want. So it can be its own authentication server, or it can point to remote authentication server. So it's super flexible. And I'll show you what that looks like here. So in this case, we're making this custom test server that's called XA EMA resource, has a couple of tools. It's streamable in 8080, and then it has OAuth enabled. It's in protected resource mode, which means it's pointing to an authorization server. So this is basically just a way that we spin up this test MCP server and point to xaa.dev as our AS. And it's got a little more information about that. So pretty straightforward. So you have this config file that you run for that MCP server, and then you just run the MCP server via node with that config file. So anyway, just to give you an idea what this MCP server actually is, this could be your own MCP server just pointing to xaa.dev as an AS. And again, we'll go into the settings. And this one's pretty simple. Again, we're going to get that client ID and client secret from the IDP, not from the registered resource. So what does it look like when you actually do this? We'll start out with the to-do server. So this is connecting to an MCP server that requires auth through EMA. So when I click it, it's going to take me back to xaa.dev as the IDP, asks me to authorize it. I'm going to hit allow, and ta-da, we're connected. So now I can go look at this. This doesn't have any tools. It only has resources. So I can see these resources that I got from that MCP server. So I authorized via my IDP. That all worked the way you would hope it would work. I can look at the connection info, and I can see the basic information about the connection. But if I go down to OAuth details, I can see that the protocol is enterprise managed, that I'm currently authorized, the client ID, that my IDP session is signed in, what the scopes were, and I can see the actual access token if you want to sort of debug this and understand what's going on there. If you want to decode it, you can decode the access token. So here that I can see that the big things I'm looking at are the issuer was the auth resource xaa.dev, and the audience was this exact MCP server URL, which is sort of what you'd expect it to be. And as I said, if I go back now here, I can see, oh, hey, I actually am signed in. My IDP sign-in is signed in, and I can sign out here if I want. I'm not going to do that, but I can. And then let's go look at my test server, which should hopefully work the same way. Now, remember when I clicked here, because I wasn't logged into my IDP, it prompted me to go through the IDP login flow. If everything's working right, now that I click on the second server, which also requires EMA auth, it's going to use that IDP connection that I already have, and it's just going to magically work. Let's see. and it magically worked. Awesome. So I can go in here. I just have a couple of tools. So I can see that the tools work, and I can do the same sort of thing. I can go back here and look at the connection info. And I can see this is that xaa resource MCP server that we spun up. Same thing, enterprise managed, authorized, and let's look at the token that we got back. And similarly, the issuer is xaa.dev as expected, and the audience now is us. It's localhost 8080, which is the URI of this MCP server. That's pretty much all there is to it. When it works, it's kind of magical. It just sort of works. Anyway, this is pretty exciting. The support will be in MCP Inspector v2. Hopefully you'll get that in your hands before too much longer. All right, thanks.